Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Beards and Cars, my podcast style series where we have more time to get deeper into subjects rather than just a regular countdown video or a review or a tune for a specific car. We talk about bigger, more overarching topics. Could be about a specific game or cars or YouTube or whatever the case may be. Now, on this occasion, this is kind of part 2, if you will, from last week's video, of course. I planned to make it one big video, but it was going to be way too long for pretty much the 6-month review of Gran Turismo Sport, and I'll get into that in just a second. But first of all, I wanted to quickly address something which was raised in a comment recently on the channel, a very in-depth comment. And it was what a particular follower of the channel, I believe he's a subscriber, wanted to know. And it's something which a lot of you guys have asked me about in the past. It's a legitimate question, and to those who have watched my content for some time, those of you who can clearly see how into racing games I am, I own most of the racing games out there for various consoles. So the question is, why don't I have a higher driver rank on Gran Turismo Sport? Why is my driving rank essentially stock? It's just the default setting with no work done on it at all. Well, the reason is very simple, because, again, this is ironic given that it's the 6-month review of the game. I've had the game since day one, and I haven't done a single online race. Now, that sounds weird, I'm sure. And I'm probably one of the only people, if not the only person, who's actually done that on Gran Turismo Sport. So the question was, why is that the case? Why don't I race online more? Is there a particular reason for that? Well, in effect, there are a couple of different reasons, to be honest. One is that I don't have a huge amount of time for just playing games. And when I do get around to playing games for my own benefit rather than with the thought of making a video, to be honest, I don't feel inclined to do it. If I'm going to just have some free time to myself, then I'll probably watch a movie. Or I'll play something else completely, like Fallout 4, for instance. Something completely different to what I do here on YouTube. Not because I get sick of it, but because that isn't my only interest. I love movies. That's why I have a second channel for it. I love other games like the Arkham series, Fallout, Dead Rising. I like to go on those to have just simple fun, a completely different kind of fun. So I'd say that's probably the primary reason why I haven't been online. And to be honest, even back on Gran Turismo 6, I didn't used to get online a huge amount back then. Many of the guys who raced with me, some of whom are still around on the channel here, will probably remember I didn't get online that much. When I did, it was always fun. So it wasn't that I didn't like it, I just didn't get around to it. Now, on Gran Turismo Sport, the other reasons why I don't are probably because, for one thing, I've heard that you can't use your microphone to talk to other people. Now, if that is correct, which seems very strange, but I've heard it from a number of people, well, that, to be honest, immediately puts me off from going online. Because to me, if you can't talk to other people, what's the point? If I wanted to drive against a faceless, voiceless driver, I could just go into career mode and do that, except I'll earn way more money. So, to me, that hurts it a lot. And although for some people not having a microphone, again, if that is correct, because I haven't done a race, so I don't know, but if that is correct, that's a huge downside for me. And that actually ties into one of the things that I dislike about the game. If that is true, then they need to change that. I mean, what are you even doing, Polyphony? What is the point of having a community if you can't even talk to each other? That's really weird. So you could kind of view that as being part of this dislike list. But those are the main reasons, basically, why I don't get online more. I plan to in the future, but I'll be more inclined, to be honest, if they do implement that. If you can talk to other people, I'll be much more inclined to go online and to do some racing, because I love the banter. I love doing my vocal impressions, the silly voices, the sound effects, the car impressions, all that kind of stuff. And many of the guys who used to run with me a lot online on Gran Turismo 6 used to also enjoy that banter. I've even done some banter videos here on the channel, way back, that you can find, where we're pretty much just being stupid and silly, but it's fun. So I love that kind of stuff. It's not that I don't like going online, it's just a combination of time, and that I don't really enjoy what I've heard about the long-term online experience that's currently in the game. So that's it for that topic. Now, let's get into the proper list of dislikes, but that is kind of one part of it anyway, which is why I included it. Now, the first one is one which many people who have played Gran Turismo Sport from day one probably won't even be aware of. You won't be aware of this unless you were on the beta, which is way back. And of course, I have a huge amount of love for the Gran Turismo Sport beta because it almost single-handedly made this channel explode. When I first played the beta, I had 2,000 subscribers. By the end of that month, I had 5,000. And ever since, it's just gone better and better because of Gran Turismo Sport. So the beta in particular was incredible for this channel. The views were insane compared to others. I got like 20,000 views in a week on my first video. That video now has like 50,000, I think, because it slowed down, of course. Not many people are going to watch beta videos anymore. Covered the demo, then covered the full game. But specifically, the thing that I miss from the beta, and this is something which I dislike about the main game, but to be honest, the reason why I dislike it is because they gave us something and then took it away, and I don't really understand why you'd do that, especially in the same game. But in the beta, you could look around the car while you were driving. You could use the analog stick, the right stick, to look around the vehicle with the chase cam like you can on Forza. Now, many people don't care about that because they use cockpit cam anyway, but for those of us who do use chase cam, myself included, because I like to look at the car, plus with certain vehicles I prefer the steering axis layout that gives you. It gives you a completely different angle of movement. Bonnet cam, for instance, is great for precise driving, cockpit cam is good for center driving, like the center axis of the car, and then chase cam gives you kind of almost a shopping trolley kind of layout where you're steering from behind the vehicle. So changing the camera view on a car makes a huge difference to how fast you can go. I just happen to be fast enough to win all of the races that I want to win in chase cam, so I very rarely need to put it in bonnet cam or cockpit cam. And for me, I just like to look at the car. And part of looking at the car is always looking around it on Forza or on Test Drive Unlimited or on pretty much any other racing game where you can look around the vehicle, not just look forward and back. So it's strange to me that they had that in the beta and then took it away from us. So that's a smaller one. If that was never in the beta, then it wouldn't have bothered me. But having it and taking it away was weird. I'm not sure why they did that, because it wasn't glitchy. So, I don't know. That one doesn't really make sense why they took it away. The next one is one which I've touched on before. I know a lot of you guys agree with this one. Some don't. That's fair enough, everyone has their own opinion. But I've touched on it specifically when it comes to a lack of racing brake upgrades. And that alone is a huge gripe that I have with the game, because not only is that completely unrealistic, but it also means that many cars which could be a lot better are extremely hampered by the time that it takes to slow them down for a corner. The simple fact is, racing ceramics, or even something like you'd see in an SLR McLaren's setup with, again, the ceramic brakes, are way better than road brakes. It's not even close. So the fact that we can't have those is very strange, especially in a game that is more geared towards racing than it ever has been before. But it's much more than that. It's actually the upgrade system in general that I'm not a huge fan of. Now, it does the job. It's certainly better than other racing games that I've played where I didn't like the tune systems at all. But for GT Sport, it definitely feels shallow compared to the previous games. Even as far back as Gran Turismo 1 and 2, you could go far more in depth with the upgrades, particularly, than you could with the tuning. Now, the tuning's still pretty good. You can adjust all the settings, etc. But it's the upgrades that I have an issue with, because nonchalantly lowering the weight or increasing it, or lowering the power or increasing it just with a slider, not only is it boring, but it's also completely lackluster in terms of how much it teaches people. And as you guys know, one of the main things that I've always tried to do on this channel, even as far back as my So You Want to Be a Tuner series, is to try and help other people to be able to know how to tune for themselves, so that they can take what I do and then put their own spin on it to make something potentially even better. So to have that whole idea of learning what each individual parts of the car do when you upgrade them, it's just neutering the learning experience for people who are, say, kids or just don't know about that stuff. When I started going to college when I was 16 to be a car mechanic, I already knew way more than any of the other kids in the class because of gaming, because of Gran Turismo, because of books that I'd read. So to take that away from kids who were the age that I was then, or younger, it just means that they're not going to learn that stuff from the game anymore. And to me, that is a huge loss. That goes way beyond just being a game. That's a learning experience which they are now deprived of. And although to those of us who already know about that stuff, you might not care, for those up-and-comers, it does matter. So, to me, that is an issue. It's way beyond just being able to slap a twin turbo on something. It's much deeper and more important than that. But again, that's very personal to me. But the racing brakes alone are something which we definitely need, and I don't get why they're not doing that. The next one is something which I'm not going to get super into because I did an entire dedicated video for it, so check that one out if you want to hear my full, uncensored opinion, if you will. And that is Group X. Group X is a mess. And that's as much as I'll say about that. Check out that video. But the other thing, and this is one that I mentioned last week, is that although for the most part I like the structure of the Group 3, 2, 1 classes, they do make sense for the most part, with the N classes it varies wildly. Because in its essence, it's a good idea, or at least it seems to be. In the lower classes, it's mostly good. But once you get into the higher classes, it makes less and less sense, especially between N500 and N700. Those classes in particular are where you can get cars which have nothing in common beyond their power. And that simply isn't fair. For instance, you could take a Ferrari F40, tune it up to N700, and you'll be taking that very heavily modified Ferrari up against a stock Dodge Charger Hellcat, a 2-ton, 700 horsepower sedan, with no upgrades that just happens to be classified that way because of its power. That is not a fair fight, and yet within the N classes it is. Now of course balance of performance can change things, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about pure fairness, basically. Now, balance of performance has to do with fairness, but even then, there are certain cars which should not be categorized together. Even when you drop something like the Alpine, the classic Alpine, into N100 against a Samba bus, that's ridiculous. It doesn't stand a chance against that. So, the N classes, although good on paper, actually don't make as much sense once you start to actually use them. And that makes me think that, in some ways, Polyphony put way too much effort into certain parts of the game, such as the history lessons that no one asked for, and I've talked about those before, of course, but they didn't put enough effort, or at least they had a weird way of putting effort into stuff which we actually do care about, like a lack of tuning upgrades, or actually making classes that work, rather than just look nice and tidy on paper. Because N1000 is all well and good until you realise that that's going to mean that the Jay Leno tank car is going to be in the same category as a Veyron. What kind of sense does that make? Now, of course, the tank car isn't in the game, but it's a point that I'm making, not a specific car. There are clear and distinct occasions where the N classes do not work. So they're going to have to do something about that, or at least start banning certain cars from online events, because it's just not fair. Now, the next one is one that's not going to be popular. It's one which probably, say, half the community will disagree with and half the community will agree with, depends who you ask. And that is what I'm going to call FIA pandering. Now, that is immediately going to get some people's heckles up, because a lot of people love the FIA integration. People who are pure drivers. And this goes back to what I said earlier about the upgrades. Some people don't care about tuning. And for those people, you probably don't care about the tuning system, or that there's no racing brakes. You probably love the FIA integration because, just like the academy drivers, which again, I've never had any interest in, you want to be a race driver in the real world, so this takes you one step closer to your goal. Whereas for those of us who don't care, well, it really is just that. We could not care less about the FIA integration. Now, a lot of the community does, but a lot of it doesn't as well. And although many people will try to have you believe that a lot of the community, the majority even, want FIA integration more than anything else in the world, that simply isn't the case. Before Gran Turismo Sport, there was no clamour for FIA integration that I ever saw on any forum or any community. Now, maybe there were one or two threads that discussed that kind of thing, but don't try and act as if that was an entire community movement, because it's not even close. Most of us didn't even think about that, let alone want it. What we wanted was a better version of what we'd already bought every other time that we had a Gran Turismo game, which is a great racing game, with tons of cars, tons of tracks, great tuning, and an immersive, massive career experience. What we got was a game that neuters the career mode and added it literally as a DLC afterthought. We had online racing, of which the balance of performance systems and driver ratings don't even work properly, so that they've had to revise it, explain it, and update it multiple times, and it's still not fixed. So the FIA pandering is basically a title that I'm giving to this system where it's like Gran Turismo Sport has put so many eggs into the one basket of the FIA that if that part doesn't work, the whole game is screwed, because it's so centered around that it almost negates other things that we actually do want. The majority of the community has proven time and time again that what we care about more than anything else is more cars and tracks. Just look at any of the comments on my videos, such as teaser breakdowns, new cars, predictions, DLC updates. All of the comments are about what people want to see on the game. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of those comments, because it is unfortunate to see a new free pack come out and then people say, oh, I want this, I want that. This isn't what I wanted. I don't agree with that either, but there is a balance between the two, because I never asked for the FIA. Many people never asked for new cars. Plenty of people didn't ask for the FIA. Plenty of people don't ask for new cars. It swings either way. And that is what I have the issue with. The community and also the developers of the game, Polyphony, acting as if they're doing us all a favour by adding the FIA. Don't try to speak for us. We'll speak for ourselves as to whether we want the FIA, and lots of us don't care. So, to me, I don't like that. Next up, though, is career mode. Now, again, I'm not going to get super into this because I kind of just discussed it, really, but I find that the career mode, again, being very much an afterthought, with only homages to previous games, like with the names of the tournaments, like Stars and Stripes, or the Mazda Roadster Trophy, stuff like that. It's very much an afterthought. It feels like a tacked-on thing on the game. And to me, the biggest issue that I have with the career mode is that it's passionless. It feels so repetitive now. And on Gran Turismo, I've got to be honest, career mode did not used to feel repetitive. On Gran Turismo 4, being a perfect example, everything was broken down into different categories of racing, different eras, different kinds of endurance race. You could even go into each manufacturer, and many of them would have their own manufacturer-specific events. Gran Turismo 4 is still the gold standard, as far as I'm concerned, for career mode, but even Gran Turismo 2 had tons of stuff to do. Gran Turismo 3 had tons of stuff. Gran Turismo 5 had probably the most interesting way of splitting up the career mode into two distinct categories of driver mode and director mode. That was great. I mean, what happened to that? Gran Turismo 6, well, Gran Turismo 6 was the start of the downhill curve. Career mode was pathetic. You could complete the whole thing in like a day. So Gran Turismo Sport is better than that, but that's not exactly saying much. That's like saying, oh, my game has more cars than the demo did. Well, big whoop. What, do you want, a round of applause? Of course it's supposed to. But next up, I wanted to talk about something which a lot of people, again, just like with asking for new cars, this is a common comment that I see on the channel. I see these comments under all of Gran Turismo's Instagram posts, various other places, and that is the community wants more real circuits. Not more variations of existing circuits which weren't real to begin with, or were at the most just inspired by the real world. Now, I'm not saying that I don't like fictional tracks. I love them. One of my favourite tracks of the entire franchise is a fictional one, Complex String. But at the same time, this also directly ties into the FIA pandering comment, or comments that I had, because once again, they want to have their cake and eat it. Or at least they want to try and make a cake and forget how to, because they're making a game which is predicated upon this FIA involvement with real-world implications and actual focus on the drivers and getting a real-world racing license. Remember the big hype about that? I haven't even heard anything about that in quite some time. The whole league thing about making real drivers like the Academy. You can't claim to have all of that integrated realism as your focus and the focal point of the franchise now, really, but then simultaneously have barely any real-world circuits. That's like saying that Burnout is a driver training program. No, that makes no sense. That's like saying that Driver San Francisco is the best simulation racing game ever built. No, of course not. Likewise, with a game that is putting so much emphasis on this real-world FIA involvement, but then featuring by far more fake circuits than real ones. That makes zero sense, especially when many of the tracks that have been excluded are actually circuits which would make a lot more people play the game. So this isn't just a personal preference, this isn't even a community preference, this is a good business choice, because put simply, Polyphony, not that they're listening anyway, but if they were, adding the Le Mans circuit would single-handedly bring thousands of people back to the game. Adding a new variation layout of Lake Maggiore doesn't. So although I like the circuit, it's just not a smarter business move to add a track that nobody was asking for when a real-world circuit with worldwide implications, such as the ones that I broke down in that other episode of Beards and Cars, Yas Marina, Spa, Imola, Le Mans, Sepang, various others too, that people actually do want. It's, again, a very strange business decision. And in many ways, Polyphony is starting to remind me, unfortunately, of Google and the way that they run YouTube. For a company that's been doing it for so long, they make some incredibly naive decisions, and they really don't make sense. It's like there's some kind of internal battle between the developers of Polyphony and the people who run Google. But again, you could easily make an entire video out of that. So the next point is no weather. Now, this is something which, to me personally, doesn't kill the game at all. As I said, none of these things do. I still play the game every day, or pretty much every day. But having no weather is a strange thing in a similar way to how I mentioned that I'd never realised that Laguna Seca, for the first time in literally years, is not in the franchise anymore. That's been such a staple that realising that it was suddenly gone kind of shocked me, because it seems like the kind of game that you would just automatically include in the lineup. Once again, to me, weather is something like that. It's such a staple of the game that I didn't even notice that it was gone. Yet many people want to see it back, not just weather, but stuff like maybe laid snow on the track, or a completely soaked circuit, like we used to have even on Gran Turismo 4 with the Tsukuba circuit in rainy conditions. Again, I do think that this is something which they will change. I strongly believe that weather is going to be added in an update. As to when, I can't say, and again, don't quote me on that because it's only a prediction, but of all the things here, I do think that weather has the strongest chance of actually being added. I do think that they care about that, because again, it adds to the realism, the immersion, so there's no real need to dwell on that for ages. The next one is one which has bugged me from day one, basically, even as far back as the beta, it kind of bugged me, and that is that you can't sell prize cars. Now again, this is something which many people probably don't care about, but for those of us who actually do like collecting cars and consider ourselves to be what we are in a game, which is a businessman, or a tuner more than a driver, that's definitely the case for me. Racing is a means to an end, just to earn cash for me, more often than not. Why can't we sell these cars? Because you have only two options. You let the car duplicates of what you already own, 9 times out of 10, just sit in your garage doing literally nothing, just adding to the number of a garage, which at the end of the day, even those who don't agree with adding tons of cars should agree with that point, because it's the same thing, tons of pointless vehicles, but then at the same time you can't sell them. You can only dump them, which serves no purpose whatsoever. It's not like the garage is filling up anytime soon. So I don't get that, but that's not something new, to be fair. That's something which a lot of racing games, but especially the Gran Turismo franchise, has always had an issue with. Cars that not only you can't sell, or that you can only dump instead of selling, or that sell for a pitiful amount. You know, it's something like you pay out 20 million credits to buy the Ferrari P4, for instance. You then don't want it anymore because you win one for free. So you go to sell it. What do you get for selling that thing? I don't even know. It's like 7 or 8 million credits. That is ridiculous. a car like that never loses value. That's the whole point. So I'm not necessarily saying that you should be able to sell it for 20 million again, but at the very least, give us an auction house so that you can actually sell these cars to other players who want them. I know a lot of people say, well, ultimately you win them all anyway. No, you don't. I've been playing the game since day one. I haven't won a single Ferrari P4, a single Jaguar XJ13, and I've won almost every single daily workout. That's well over 180 cars. So, no, you don't win them all. The amount of duplicates that I have is ridiculous. There are tons of expensive cars which I don't win. I generally win the worst one of the four. And I think it might be because my driver level is higher. I don't know about other drivers who have a high level, if you can concur on that or not. But for whatever reasons, that just doesn't happen for me. So to be able to sell those cars, not just on your own, but potentially to other players, or even to gift cars, because although I know it was an issue on Gran Turismo 5 with gifting modded cars, that's not an issue now, because people who mod just get banned anyway, so who really cares about that? But I would love to be able to implement giving away cars, because for instance for the photo mode competition each week, I could give away cars for the people who are featured. I could even give away virtual cars for actual giveaways, such as the one that we're currently doing. It ended today. By the time you've seen this video, the competition has ended. I'll be pulling the names out of the hat tomorrow and announcing the winners. And incidentally, just on that point, we had almost 100 people enter for the games, over 60 people for the car packs, and funnily enough, only 5 people for the DLC downloads. So it's pretty cool turnout, but as I said, we'll get to that tomorrow. And the final one, and this is one which probably won't bother that many people, but for those of us who have a very strong showing on their storefront, as I like to call it, again, kind of a Forza reference, on your storefront, or your community page, technically, you've got all of your photos, your liveries, your decals, your helmets, your driving suits. That's all well and good. But we used to be able to do something which, again, they only took out in the last couple of updates, and they haven't added it back again. And again, this makes 0 sense. It's almost as if by doing this particular thing, Polyphony is trying to cause trouble in the community, because what they've done has no logical basis whatsoever. They've taken away the option of deleting comments. That's stupid. That is just straight up dumb. There is no way that you can justify that, because now literally anyone can spam anyone's page saying, come and check out my content. You could write that 100 times, and the person that you've done it to can't do anything about it. That is retarded. It literally is backward, which is what retarded means. We've taken a step back to previous updates when you could do it, now you can't. Now, what I do, because it's really the only thing you can do, well, you've got 2 options. You can either ignore it and just allow them to have free advertising, which riles me up because that is so pathetic. I can't stand people who advertise themselves on other people's work because you're clearly not creative enough to do it for yourself. But what I like to do now is if somebody tries to self-advertise on my content, be it a livery that I did or a photo or a replay or whatever the case may be, I then go to their page and I write that on every single livery that they have. So you do it to one of mine, I'll do it to 10 of yours. And the funny thing is, it works, because they rarely do it twice. So that's the only thing that I can recommend for those of you who have also been finding that annoying, and I know that many of you have, because it's just blatant, well, spamming. It's literally the definition of it. So that makes no sense. Some of the things that Polyphony does make 0 sense to anyone. So it's weird to me that they took that away. That's a huge gripe of mine. It's not something which is necessarily going to annoy everyone. Somebody who doesn't make liveries, for instance, it probably won't bother you. But I literally had a comment from someone self-advertising on one of my things. Then I went looking for an obscure livery from someone else entirely. I scrolled back about 3 weeks to find this livery. I clicked on it, and they put a comment on this person's livery as well, like 3 weeks ago. The same person spamming everything. That's pathetic. And you know what? I've tried reporting those people. They do nothing about it. So, as I said just now, it's almost as if they're trying to cause trouble in the community, because that makes no sense. Again, very naive business move. They need to grow up. They need to get with the program and start to actually think before they just randomly change things before each update, because it's almost like they're just changing things to make us feel like they're doing something with the game. No, focus on what needs to be done. Don't take away things that we actually need, like cameras that can move around the car and being able to legitimately delete comments, because it's not exactly like that's something that you could abuse. It is your content that you can delete comments on after all. So I just don't get polyphony sometimes. As I said earlier, remarkably naive for such an experienced company. But overall, those are the things that I don't like the most about the game. Many of them can be very simply rectified. You can easily fix the comment problem. You can easily fix adding the 360 camera back to the cars. You can relatively easily implement weather. I believe that they will. It's more the infrastructure problems that are the bigger ones for me. Stuff like the fact that the N classes just don't work in certain cases, or that the FIA pandering completely alienates part of the audience. Because regardless of if you're a super fan of GT Sport or of the franchise, because let's face it, there are many people who will just blindly follow whatever polyphony says because they're just fanboys, just like people who follow DC or Marvel and automatically hate the other one, which is stupid, let's be honest. But those people will just forgive anything that polyphony do. But the simple fact is, look at the numbers. Polyphony can see the numbers. People are dropping off of this game every day. I am already seeing a drop in views because people are losing interest. More cars and more tracks can only keep people's interest for so long. The core parts of the game, which I referred to, are still an issue. Because with all of its fancy details, with all of its bright and colourful features, at its core, Gran Turismo Sport is not what we asked for. And I've said that before. Plenty of people disagree with it, and plenty of people claim that they did want that. Well, maybe you did. There's no real way of proving that. But many of us didn't. I would presume, perhaps wrongly, but definitely, according to the comments on this channel, that the vast majority of people did not want Gran Turismo Sport. We wanted Gran Turismo 7. Gran Turismo Sport is not Gran Turismo 7. And as much as I enjoy the game, if Gran Turismo 7 came out today, I would drop it in a heartbeat, because that is what I wanted. So ultimately, I still play the game, I still enjoy the game, and there are many things about the game, as I said last week, which are great, which the franchise has never had before. But, as I've said before, that doesn't make me blind, and it shouldn't make you blind either, just because of fandom. A game can be fallible. My favourite games are all fallible. Test Drive Unlimited has its problems. Forza has its problems, for sure. Most of the problems on Forza tend to be about the console, rather than the game itself. But yeah, overall, that's the things that I didn't like as much. Ended up being a longer video, which isn't too surprising. And of course, this video will probably get more dislikes than the like video, because that's the nature of fandom. But, of course, slap down below things that maybe you didn't like as much about the game. If you want to put stuff that you do like, I'd recommend going to the other video, because that's more of a forum for that kind of thing. But sure, you can put them down below if you want. It's just not entirely as applicable. So, let's get into it down below in the comments. And, of course, I'll see you guys next week. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.